Hello, everybody. It is good to see you this afternoon. At least here it is afternoon here in Maryland. I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us. I have a special guest today. He is known as Tim, and he is very much an influencer on many platforms, but especially on this one, IG Live. He is going to be joining me today, and we are going to talk about new evangelicals and what that means and what direction we're going. Hey, here's my disabled bunny. How you doing? So we're just going to wait for a second for people to kind of start piling in, and hi, and we'll get rolling. I see he's just logged on, so we're going to get him to join, and we'll get rolling.
Hey,
Hey, how are you doing?
good. How are you?
I am good. I am good. Just enjoying a rather quiet day, if that's even you know, possible.
Good for you. Glad to
Yeah.
hear it.
Right? Well, I'm so happy you took the time to talk. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It means a lot. Any chance to talk is it's honestly I podcast so often where I'm always the person doing the interview. So if someone wants to interview me, it's like, you want me to share my thoughts?
I
Sure. I'm in.
I totally get that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the same thing with me. If anybody ever like says, "Hey, can I interview you?" I'm like, I don't know what to say. This is interesting. Okay, I'm open
Yes,
to questions, right? So,
exactly. Sorry, Larry. Yeah,
well, I mean, you know me. I mean,
yeah,
I,
exactly.
I was uploading my IG lives to YouTube this weekend, and I just didn't even realize that I'm close to like 50 interviews that I've done,
Wow. Wow.
and I'm just like, wow, I just love stories, and I love hearing people's stories, and I love seeing where they got to, from where they came to where they got to, and obviously you are one I've wanted to talk to for quite a while, and I'm excited to hear your story and how you got to where you're at. Because you're right, you do a lot of interviewing, you share a lot that's on here on social media, and so I'm excited to kind of dive into who you are. Um,
Cool.
I'm excited. So, with that being said, for any of my followers that are going to be joining us that don't know who you are and they're drastically missing out, would you just go ahead and kind of take a moment and introduce yourself?
Sure. That's really kind. Thanks, Brad. Yeah, my name is Tim. I created a little community called the New Evangelicals. We mainly exist online in different various spaces. Grew up evangelical, grew up pretty deep in that culture. I'm sure we'll unpack that. And committed to Jesus and trying to find ways to do that that really are, at this point, are pretty far outside of the typical evangelical um, boundary set, I think, but it wasn't always that way and it wasn't intentional. I found the boundaries due to wanting to follow Jesus. That's really how I like to phrase it. It wasn't because I wanted to sin more or whatever. It was like, what if we took Jesus's words seriously about like turning the other cheek? Like I'm into this, right? So that's where I am.
Yes. Oh, thank you for loving the pipe. And then Changing Season says, "Yay, Tim." So you're fan
Yay.
driving. So, and I've got to tell you, you are such a natural in front of the camera. Like you, listening to you articulate and speak, you say things that have been rolling around in my mind that I haven't figured out how to say. Right, and coming from my story. I'm an ex evangelical,
Yeah.
Baptist. Please don't hold that against me. Um, but I left 4 years ago, right? So
Mm-hmm.
after 20 plus years, I'm hearing you talk, and I'm going, yes, that's it, and yes, that's it, and yes.
Honestly, it means a lot because I mean, listen, we're always our own worst critics, and I'm a musician, so I guess I'm more of a creative type anyway. But I just feel like I do not talk clearly. I know that to some that might sound crazy, but I listen back to myself and I'm like, oh, I should have hit this point, or I could have said this better. But it means a lot to hear you say that because I'm just being me, honestly. Like there really isn't like an on camera Tim and then like an off camera Tim, right? It's just that's just kind of who I am. And so I told myself early on when I launched this Instagram. I mean, I converted my personal Instagram over to this account. I had like 2,000 followers. And so I didn't know like what was going to happen. People left. Obviously I'm just going from this one thing to this. But I told myself early on, like no matter what would happen, I would just be as much myself as possible on social media because I think that there is this like influencer culture, right? Where if you have a big number in front of your account, you are either you want to think that like you're more important, right? And that your words are more valuable, or
Yeah.
people think that they are. And so I've just done my best, and I don't always do it perfectly. There's always room to grow, but I've just done my best to be as honest and transparent as humanly possible online. I mean,
Yeah.
besides having a 24/7 live stream of my life, I can't really be much more transparent and honest. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally agree. What you see with me online is what I am in person, right? I mean,
Right.
I thankfully have found that, right? Once I left the church, the systematic evangelical church, the Southern
Yeah.
Baptist, I was saying, well, who am I? Who do I want to be,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so, um, and you're right. Yeah, I totally believe when I watch you that what you see is what you get. No doubt in my mind. So that's why I'm so excited today. Okay, so all right, so let's do this. Um, Give me take a moment and just share with us your religious background for you personally.
Yeah, I mean, I was brought up in pretty much fundamentalist evangelicalism. I was homeschooled for 9 years. Went to a hymns only church as a kid. My parents got quote unquote saved later on in life. My dad comes from a pretty dysfunctional family, a lot of alcoholism and stuff. So he was kind of on that path. So looking back now at 33 with two kids, I get why he went from kind of one extreme to the other, right? So when he found God, he just happened to find a really conservative fundamentalist church, and that became to him Christianity. This is what it is. So that's how I grew up. When I was 11, the church wanted to get a little more progressive, so we got a drum set so we could play some modern worship tunes. And my dad said, "Well, having an 11-year-old kid on the drums, me, will probably make it make it a much easier transition." So I started playing drums in the church at age 11. But yeah, I mean, long story short, I've been a committed Christian my entire life. I don't remember any time without the church or being at church or going to Awana or doing VBS or doing worship team stuff. Like it's just since day one, that's been my life and still is to this day. So I very much am a product of that. I did a lot of parachurch ministries. I did children's stuff. I work with an organization called Child Evangelism Fellowship that works on doing these like 5-day backyard clubs and 5-day clubs. So I was steeped in it. And then I continued on as a volunteer in different churches, helping to plant churches, helping to do small group stuff, doing a lot of worship stuff. I got pretty proficient at drumming, so I played in worship bands for a lot of years, and now I play music professionally as my second job. So I'm saying all this to kind of channel my inner Paul of if anyone was a Jew, it was Paul, right? Well, if anyone was an evangelical, it was Tim. Like my wife and I saved ourselves for marriage. We did the purity pledges, like we did it all. So that's just how I grew up. That was my world from the beginning.
Well, yeah, you and I have a lot in common, unfortunately. Uh,
Sure.
so obviously, deconstruction is a hot topic today, right?
Yeah.
And I don't even know if I like the word.
Right.
Honest with
Yeah.
you, when I was interviewing the Naked Pastor,
Hmm.
he described it as growing, not necessarily turning down, but growing up and through, right?
Sure.
Which I think is a great idea for it, right? It's not necessarily, hey, what can we tear down, but growing through that which should not hinder us any longer, is I think what he was kind of talking about, maybe.
Yeah, there's a
Um,
lot of ways that we can define that we can talk about it. I'm not a big fan these days of the term either. It's a little too broad for me. I mean, what I say is deconstruction is an explosion. So you really can't call it a movement because we're not all headed in the same direction. Not in a bad way. Some people are like, "Hey, I grew up evangelical. I think atheism makes more sense. I'm taking the exit ramp. I'm out." It's like, I get it. I really do.
yeah,
No fault there. People like myself, we have built communities being still centered on Jesus, trying to explore the Christian tradition. That's very different than someone who might become or go down the route of into atheism or agnosticism, right? So that's why
right.
I call it an explosion. We're going in different directions, even if we're still cool with each other. It's not a bad thing. The other thing I would say is, I also, like you, I'm sure I'm always trying to think about, like, how do I explain what's in my head to come out? I think one of the ways I've thought about it that's been helpful for me is I pretty much was taught to build a big piece of IKEA furniture with the wrong instructions, and it's all messed up, right? And then you realize it, and you're like, oh, those times where you don't read that one detail, and the one part's in the wrong spot, you're going to do so much, right? Well, I
Yeah.
feel like that's my whole evangelical heritage in a lot of ways, where it's like, okay, I built something, but I have pieces all in the wrong spot. So I think in that beginning time, that deconstruction, I'm going to use the evangelical term here, seasoned, if you will, right? I know, I'm sorry, hashtag triggered. I'm sorry, friends, but I'm just saying, like, there is that time where you're like, you know what? Before I can maybe, this is how I would say it. If me and David and you were talking, I would say, yeah, I agree with him. But I think a lot of people in the beginning are like, well, before I can do that, I have to learn, like, what I did backwards. Like, what did I do that is not in the right place? So there is that moment where you do have to deconstruct some stuff, right? You're just kind of like, like, I have to unscrew this, and I got to reread these instructions. And it turns out I was reading them in not my native language. I was reading them in French and not in English, right? So it's all tied together. So it's a lot of work, and people freak out, myself included. I mean, my God, don't misunderstand, folks. There's no guru situation happening here. There very much is a moment of my life that is full of anxiety and doubt and panic attacks, and just like, what is life, and just having a crisis. That can be kind of the intro to deconstruction for some, but there is light on the other side that kind of continues you out, and that kind of becomes a fertile soil where you can start growing beyond maybe what you were given as a child or a young adult.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, it's like all of my clients. I mean, none of them have ended up in the same place at the end.
Right.
I mean, it's like an explosion, just pieces scattered in all directions, right? So,
right.
So let me ask you this. Let me ask you a personal question. You obviously went through some ongoing deconstructing, if we want to call it that, just for technology, right?
Yeah.
Did that begin for you? Like, what really kind of set that off, or was it a series of things?
Well, let's keep in mind, I'm not sure how the audience out there feels, but I didn't have the term deconstruction in my arsenal until like a year and a half ago when I started this, So let's assume that maybe there are elements here that I picked up on earlier. In the beginning, when I was 18, I was part of a really intense, like, young adults kind of community. It wasn't part of a church. It was kind of our own thing. And we were really, like, we were kind of zealots. We were really passionate about, just understanding God and worshiping. And I was very much in that, what is the true gospel kind of phase, like you're listening to the Paul Washers of the world, right? Like, yeah, what's the truth? Like, what does the Bible really say about what the true gospel is, not this fake gospel kind of thing. So I was already kind of primed that way, where it was like, okay, is this megachurch culture working? Is this light show really what it's about? I think we have to strip back. At that time, I'm 18. I'm reading a book by a guy named Frank Viola called Pagan Christianity, which is like, I mean, that is just that book you read, you're like, after you're done, you're like, oh my God, everything we knew is from paganism. The church is corrupt, So I'm reading that. I'm also reading Shane Claiborne's book, Irresistible Revolution. So for the first time, I'm thinking on a more like a corporate level of how sin and greed and injustice can work. So I'm just trying to wrestle with these things. So I think even back then was the beginning of me being like, maybe like this church, this mega church, big, light show church thing, it isn't really where it's at, right? And at the same time, I'm with this community group who's all kind of asking that question together. And because we're in charge, we're able to experiment with like different models of leadership. So we had a leadership team at one point. Then we were rotating out leaders and just like how to run this community. And we were 18. I was there for maybe 6-7 years. So that's when you have the most amount of freedom with the least amount of responsibility, right? So we just had like a lot of time to hang out all the time. And I don't use the Acts model. I don't use that really anymore. But it was very much a community of people who were just friends, who were just living life and doing this stuff together, asking those questions. So it starts really there for me of just like that framework or that foundation starting to be laid, not knowing where I was heading. And then as I kept on growing and learning, when 2016 happened, when Trump happened, I think that was the major moment where I said, and again, I didn't have the language for it then, I do now, but where I said, okay, I thought that because I assumed that in my church I was a part of, and like the church culture I was a part of, because we had the same beliefs, we automatically would have the same values. But clearly we don't, right? Like our values are off. And that's hard to like, in your head, it's so cloudy. So that was the beginning of me thinking something is really wrong in this church culture, in like this thing I'm a part of, because I'm just watching pastor and faith leader and pastor just say like, oh, Trump is great, Trump is good. And when I have people in my old fundamentalist days, right, when I grew up homeschooled in that church bubble, who raised me, who I still kept in touch with, when they were telling me when I was a kid, hey, sex is sacred. Hey, no porn, no masturbation, right, before marriage, nothing like that at all. It's one man, one woman for life. And then they go, Tim, why aren't you voting for Trump? The guy on the cover of Playboy magazine, the guy on his third marriage, the guy who's on a hot mic grabbing women, right, saying that. It's like, you're asking me that question? Like, oh, I can't reconcile this anymore. Like all of my categories were just blown up. So I think that was the beginning of me saying I have to go way deeper than just, is church, are we doing it right or not? Something systemic here is wrong. And that's what kind of got me down that path. And then you add on, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, you add COVID. And when you throw all those things in and how the church responded to all of those things, it made me go, something is wrong.
Yeah.
It is deeply wrong. And I don't know what it is yet, but I because I'm so committed to this way of Jesus, and I believe in what these people taught me, right? I have to go further and see what's going on. So that's kind of the big overview. We can dive into any of that if you want.
Yeah, I totally get that. I was dumbfounded by the church's response to all of those.
Yeah,
It didn't match up with the Jesus I learned about or knew, right? And the teachings. And these were the same people that taught these kinds of things about Jesus that you would think would go ahead and support or not support the events that took place. So when you started to move, I guess you could say, away from the traditional idea of church or systematic church, when you started to seek more Jesus, if you will, or hey, let's found more on Jesus, how did your friends and your family react?
Well, I was always involved in systemic in churches, in institutions. Like I had a time where I took a break, but I mean, I was always having this conversation while being in a church or helping to plant a church, or I helped plant a missional community at one point. I helped plant a church in the movie theater at one point. So I was all through that. I'm still in church. I'm still part of a CMA church, a non-denominational church, an AG church, right? So all of the people kind of knew like that I was thinking about these things. And again, like it wasn't as, I didn't have the language yet. So I would post things on Facebook and, people I was known for a while as being controversial on Facebook for posting whatever I posted. And, I even had a podcast before New Evangelicals that I had two other friends who were more conservative, but we would talk about this because they agreed the whole Trump thing was crazy. So, I was always kind of talking about this. So my family, my parents, we don't really talk about that stuff. Like we're pretty far apart on that. My dad just kind of is deep down in that far right rabbit hole at this point. And my wife and I made a decision that for them, especially now that they have grandkids, our kids, that's more important than us trying to convert them, because in their mind, I'm still their kid. You know what I mean? So we get along, but we don't talk about that stuff. It wouldn't be good. And as far as my friends, I mean, it depends on which group of friends. You know, I was asked to leave my church. Well, I was asked to stop serving as a worship drummer at my church due to New Evangelicals when I started this. So I lost all that about a year and a half ago. I was there for 6 years. I lost about 90% of those friendships within a few months. So that was a pretty painful, bitter, like it was really hard. Honestly, it was a hard time. So that's kind of where I'm at now. And in a nutshell, again, I can tell more of that story if you want. It doesn't matter to me. I'm open about all of that. But I don't really have a lot of those friends anymore, frankly.
No, I think that's valid in the sense that it does impact those friendships. It does impact whether or not you get to be a drummer in a church. I mean, when you start speaking up upon that, I have family that doesn't talk to me because I totally veered off that course. So I get
strange.
that. It is, but it's very prevalent for people that are
totally.
right.
Totally.
So
we get those DMs all the time. I mean, what I'm saying is not unique to me. It's very common.
Yeah, it is. Unfortunately. So let me ask you. You obviously, before you started the New Evangelicals, all right. What was it that burned in your soul, per se, that said, hey, I need to start this and start calling out injustice or the flaws in the teaching or whatever have you? What is it that pushed you forward to start an IG page like this?
2 words. Sean Foyt.
Okay.
All thanks to him. Seriously. This was during COVID. We're shut down. I'm not working at the time. I'm on my front porch in my old man rocking chair. No offense, Brad. And, and I'm just watching Sean Foyt, and I'm just seeing what for those of you out there, Sean Foyt is this worship leader who started this Let Us Worship movement during COVID. That actually netted him $5 million in 1 year, by the way, but I digress. And so his big claim to fame was he was holding maskless worship gatherings not like towards the end, in the middle, in the beginning of a worldwide pandemic when everything was shut down. His big point was this is tyranny. They're not going to mask us. They can't control us. And he toured the U.S. doing these gatherings. And I'm sitting, now don't forget, I'm still part of Evangelical Church. I'm part of worship culture. I'm doing very professional kind of productions. Like, I'm all in that world. I get what Sean's doing. And I'm sitting there, I'm just like, this is crazy. Like, what on earth is going on? What happened to love your neighbor? And this was when, by the way, when this happened, we were still like, we didn't know how COVID responded. We didn't know how transmissible it was. This was when we were still wiping down surfaces and wiping down our packages. We weren't sure how it was, how you can catch COVID. So there was no vaccine out. And Sean's just like, who cares? We're not going to be silenced. And I'm sitting on my rocking chair, and I go, I just can't take this evangelical movement. Like, we need something better. We need a new evangelical movement. Like, we just need new evangelicals. And I thought about it, and I was like, Tim, you have a lot of ideas, and usually they're really terrible. That's not a bad name. That's not a bad name. Like, you should look that one up. So I searched it, and no one had it. No one had the term the New Evangelicals. So I said, well, you know what? I don't know if I'll do anything with this, but let me just grab the names just so I have them. So I grabbed them on Instagram. There was no podcast out yet, but I grabbed the domain, thenewevangelicals.com, and I sat on it. And I typed out almost like a statement of beliefs manifesto, like what we believe on the environment, on social justice, on whatever it was. And at the time, I need to be transparent with the audience, I was not fully affirming yet of the queer community. I was very much a inclusive guy, meaning, hey, despite what I might think about what the Bible says, those folks should not be barred from worshiping. So I was in that camp. But personally, I wasn't sure how to reconcile some of the Bible stuff. And, I was still working through that. So I was just kind of there. So I just typed out my manifesto, if you will. I asked a few people in church circles what they thought. They thought it was pretty good. Okay, so I sat on that. And then for those of you out there, if you know the account Christians Who Curse Sometimes, it's a pretty large meme account. Him and I became friends because I interviewed him on my old podcast. And I told him my idea, and he was like, you need to do this. Now, I'm a type 6 on the Enneagram, which means my core value is fear. fear of everything. So I'm like, dude, I don't know. Like, what if I launch this and it just doesn't, it goes nowhere? And what if, like, I mean, the New Evangelicals, that's an audacious statement to make. Like, hey, we are New Evangelicals. I mean, that's a big statement to make, just to say we're New Evangelicals, you know? So I sat on that for a few months. And then eventually he was like, dude, just do it. Like, don't stop being a baby. Pull the trigger. What's the worst case scenario? It fails. Okay, no big deal. You tried. So I launched it in December of 2020, and here we are now. I'm doing this full time. We're a nonprofit, and you know, we do everything else that we do. So it's been a wild ride, especially being a type 6. So
when you're a type 6 and you launch something like that, that's impressive. That's overcoming fear. That's great.
Yeah, you know what's interesting about that, for if you don't mind, just to share with the audience, for those of you who are type 6s out there, when I kind of discovered the Enneagram stuff, you know, I was like, okay, type 6, what kind am I? And it's like, your core value is fear. I'm like, dang it, I don't have any of the cool ones, like fear, which also makes a lot of sense. I am naturally fearful, but I think as I've grown, I've learned to embrace that fear, and that fear, I think, is why this account works. Because whenever I post something, I do my best to think about all the worst case scenarios of how it could be received. Like, well, what if someone sees it this way and this goes up to become this huge thing and I lose the, right? I think about it like that. And that actually helps me really be on like this like razor's edge of like kind of this really weird balance. So the fear part, I think, actually helps me do this work and be as inclusive as we are, especially considering that a white man runs this. I mean, I mean, frankly, I get it, because white men walk into places and just take over. But my type 6 fear kept me in a place of like, no, you need to be humble and like be teachable as you go through this. So I actually think it helped me long term, frankly.
I think it's amazing. I think I don't even know what to say. That's incredible. Okay, so,
Thanks.
So let me do, in your opinion, what is biggest threat to the church today?
Christian nationalism. Jesus, I can't even say this. Christian nationalism is the greatest threat to the evangelical church and to America today. The end. Case closed. Goodbye.
There it is. That's perfect. I couldn't agree more.
I don't know how else to say it. That is without a doubt I mean, you know what though? To be frank, Brad, I'm not sure if it's a threat anymore. More than now, it's a weapon.
Yeah.
I don't know. Because we track, if you follow us, you know, for those of you out there, we track Christian nationalism a lot. And like at this point, I don't know if it's a threat anymore, more than it's just a virus that found a host that's like, come on in, hang out, replicate, totally cool with us. Why take an antibiotic? There's no problem here. Meanwhile, they're taking like ivermectin for wokeism. And you're like, what are you doing? This is useless. This is not, you don't even have this. Like, stop. I'm just saying, like, it's so, I'm not sure if I can curse here, but it's batshit crazy what's happening. So there you go.
Curse as much as you want on my
I just don't get it. Do not get it. Oh, anyway.
Oh man. Okay, so I can't add anything to that because that's all right. So, in your opinion, what's another opinion question? What could the future church look like? Like not a nationalism, okay? Just like what you have started. All right, New Evangelicals. What does that church look like?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that when we use the term church, we're really talking about like a massive institution that's way deeper than just our own little bubble. You know, there's Eastern Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox, there's the Catholic, there's Protestant, then we have like our flavor in there. So I think that one of the mistakes a lot of people can do, and I'm guilty of this, let me just say that I'm not above this trap, is that you start something, maybe it becomes successful, and we're doing something new. And I don't think that's the move. I think we have to learn backwards to go forwards, right? Meaning, like, I think that we have to learn. I think that we have to explore the Christian tradition before we even think about building our own room in that house. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because like what I think like part of the cycle, I talk about this with like our team a lot and with other people where I'm like, just because we're in this deconstruction space doesn't mean that we can't create harmful systems again. I mean, let's just be frank. Let me just be honest, right? I've been indoctrinated in evangelical culture for 33 years. So what do I know? I know that numbers matter. I know that you have to replicate, right? I know that you have to find ways to help people lead other people, volunteer, right? So you can take all those elements, put new lipstick on it, and be like, hey, here's the new cool thing, with all the same elements and all the same metrics of that toxic evangelical culture that we are so-called coming away from, right? So I don't have any answer to what a new church would look like. I just know that one way I would phrase it is that I think that one of the major problems in the evangelical circles that so many of us have been a part of is that they are event focused, not community focused. So their church community operates around events, mainly the Sunday morning events, right? And I don't think that's helpful long term. I don't think it builds genuine connections, and I don't think it also. I just don't think. I don't think it's the right metric. I don't think event is the way that the church is supposed to organize. Personally, I'm a believer, and I don't have any. Again, I'm not. This is all still in theory land for me. I'm sure there are people doing this, but I'm a big believer of small interconnected communities that are just loving God and loving their neighbor consistently. You know, I think that Sunday morning looks a lot more like brunch around someone's kitchen table than it does in a massive multi-million-dollar building with like 100 volunteers. And as a drummer, Ableton and in-ears and production, which as a drummer I love, but I just don't think that is the point, or I don't think that's what makes church effective. I think it's people just being friends and loving other people and their neighbors as well as possible. So I think that's how I answer that now. But I'm still working on that. That's still a thought and process.
No, I love that. One of the things that I saw years ago was there was a community in Philadelphia, and it was a community of believers, and they all lived in this neighborhood, and all they did was they offered free childcare. They made sure people had groceries. They mowed people's lawns. They literally took care of that community and just loved the people. And
I live right by Philly. What's the name of is it the Simple Way where Shane Claiborne is?
I'll look it up for you.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious because that's very much. I mean, Shane Claiborne's in Philly. He started the Simple Way, and they're very much like that.
It may have been Shane Claiborne. Yeah.
Okay.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
I go, well, that's really neat because that's out of the church building. They're literally investing in people and loving people, right?
Yeah.
At least as far as I could see surface level.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So I agree, though. I really struggle with the massive buildings. I struggle with pastors not being or having part-time jobs out in the community. I struggle with a lot of those kinds of things of saying, hey, what would it look like if Jesus was actually running this? You know, I mean, instead of the way in which our systems have set things up.
Yeah, you know, there's a lot to that. I mean, I think about like even my old church. You know, like the pastors. They're really like my worship pastor was really like a venue manager. He was managing a venue, and his whole week was centered around making sure that venue had its performance every Sunday. So even relationships were built to fuel the venue on Sunday morning. Right? So like any friendship you might have had was contingent upon, well, this thing benefits Sunday morning. So, hey, a new volunteer who does camera, we're now friends because I need them to do camera every other week, or however it would be, right? And I feel like the other part of this that we have to be aware of is that our theology drives this. So if the theology is the most important thing is about where you go when you die, right? And to kind of quote or to pull the Francis Chan analogy, right? Of like the rope where he has a little bit of red, and then he has like 100 feet of rope. He's like, this is your life. That's eternity, you know? And he kind of shows like what matters more. Yeah. As long as that's kind of in the psyche of the evangelical, right? They're always going to have a focus on converting and saving souls, which isn't even a biblical concept. Speaking of, you know, talking about how much Paul talks about the resurrection for crying out loud, but I digress. But as long as that is the focus, and as long as those events convert people in that way of walking down the aisle, praying that prayer, making the profession of faith, checking off on the card. Now we can say how many souls we saved. As long as those metrics are fed by that model, it's never going to change. So we have to change our theology, which will hopefully change our metrics, which then change our model, which I just thought about right now. Wow. You know, if I was a pastor, I'm telling you, I could sell this shit, man. I could sell it for a lot of money. But I mean, I just put this together right now, but I think that's the order, right? Like the theology has to shift. So, okay, maybe it's not about heaven or hell ultimately. Maybe it's about heaven on earth now. Okay, if that's our responsibility, how do we measure success? Okay, if it's not about massive numbers to save souls or grab people from other churches, then why do our systems not support that metric? They have to change. I think that's the order.
So what you just confirmed here is that you should be more often.
I see what?
You should be interviewed more often.
Sure.
So let me ask you this one. The new evangelical movement, what's next for it? Do you have any ideas? Like what's
world domination. You think Hillsong is big? Wait till you see new evangelicals. They don't know what's coming. I want to start a massive multimedia worship band that tours the world, making billions of dollars. How's that sound?
Perfect. It's a play.
I just want to get rich. That's all. That's a joke, friends. I'm just kidding. So we are. It will be 2 years in December of this year. So we're a year and a half into this thing. And as things grew, it was like, man, okay, we need funding. Okay, how do we do that? Okay, we need to get organized in the back end. And also we need language. Like, what are we doing? Like, all right, Tim, so you critique in reels, you answer DMs, you ask people questions and they share this. They say it's super cathartic. Great, but what are we doing? So, I think that there's an amazing team of people that work with me to make a lot of the big stuff happen. They come on as volunteers, they offer their time. They're like, listen, I just want to help. I'm like, okay. So we do our best to manage that. And we have some people who are really, really skilled. And they're like, listen, I just believe in what we're doing. I can't donate, but I can give you this time instead. I'm like, okay. So I've had some people who actually flew to my house to help us kind of work through what's the language that we have for new evangelicals. When it comes to what we're doing, how do we describe it, right? And then how do those things give us some boundaries of what's in scope and what's out of scope for us as an organization, right? So, essentially the way that we define new evangelicals now is that we're Jesus-centered, we're an inclusive Jesus-centered community that really focuses on holding space for those marginalized by the evangelical church. That's our main thing. And we do it by holding space / building community, by advocating for the community, and by helping them explore the Christian tradition. Those are our three major pillars: holding space, exploring the Christian tradition, and advocating on their behalf. So that helps us a lot of have it's still very broad, which is good because for me, I'm a very broad, wide kind of person. Everything's kind of connected, but it also gives us some kind of framework, right? So that's where we are now. We, it's really unbelievable because we are funded just based on donations. So we don't charge for anything that we do. And that was a core value early on. Myself and the people who started doing this with me, we all agreed it would be so improper to charge people for help for financial gain. It felt icky. It felt kind of evangelically. It just didn't feel good. Now, there are people who have Patreon accounts. I'm not knocking any of that. There's a lot of ways to do this. We just chose, especially with me being a white male, it didn't feel right being like, hey, if you want extra help, want that bonus episode, $10 a month, we'll give it to you. It just didn't feel, I didn't like how it felt. So what we said is listen, community, mainly Instagram, here's where we're at. Here's where I'm at. Here's where we need to go. Can you help us get there? And they have. So we're funded. I receive a small salary from this on top of doing my music, and it works. And we continue to grow, which is as far as donations that come in, which honestly is a huge relief for me. Again, type 6, I have 2 kids under 2. I live in New Jersey, the most expensive state almost in America. And we our budget is thin, but it works, and I'm so grateful for that. So it's been interesting as far as where we go. And I'm sorry to kind of give you the back end of that, but it's kind of important to know. Um, it's interesting because we could go a lot of different ways. I mean, each one of those pillars is like its own thing. I mean, how do we hold space for people? That could be its own, like week-long discussion. How do we advocate for people? That could be one. How do we explore the Christian tradition? So the future of New Evangelicals right now is we're currently funding to try and kind of just build our space and kind of just renovate it a little bit to try and beef up like just our systems, meaning if someone approaches us and they find us on Instagram, how do they find out that we do Zoom groups for free? Where we bring in like leading theologians to go over what is process theology, what is Black liberation theology? How do they know? So like our communication tools we're working on. We're working on redoing our website, stuff like that. I think the future is that we just continue to hold space for people and we kind of see ourselves as like that first room in the Christian house. So, and I'm starting a little long-winded here, Brad, but if you don't mind, I'll just explain to the audience briefly. The analogy we use that might give you something to kind of grab onto is that a lot of us grew up in the basement of the Christian tradition. And we were just told, hey, this is all there is. Like, welcome to Christianity. It's this basement. Well, it's a little dirty. There's some dark corners. There's some bright corners. Find one. You're safe. And a lot of us found like, well, there are these stairs. And we were told, well, if you go up those stairs, there's nothing up there for you. There's no oxygen. There's no Christianity. It's just death. It's nothing up there. It's apocalyptic. And, as we walk up those stairs, what we realize is that we're actually in a beautiful, massive house with hundreds of rooms that are all tied to that Christian tradition. So we want to be that first room that when someone walks up, we go, hey, there's oxygen. It's actually fresh up here. It's fresher than down there. You're safe here. Catch your breath. It's kind of disorienting to realize that maybe you were lied to all these years. You can sit here as long as you want. And from there, the pillars are holding space as that first room. Advocating for them is talking back to those stairs that keep yelling at us, calling us heretics. And then exploring the Christian tradition is, hey, we go on tours introducing you into different rooms of the house with different theologians, and you can join us whenever you want. That's how our journey for people kind of works. So we're just working on kind of fleshing that out, building that out, and making that a really easy transition for people to find help. And if they want to stay faithful to Jesus, that is not attached to fundamentalist evangelicalism. I know that's a lot, but there you go.
No, that's awesome. Well done. So as we wrap up this interview, I hate to wrap it up, but I could talk to you all day, but we're about the 45-minute mark almost. So
sure.
Tell us, what is the best way to find, follow you, donate, whatever? Like, tell us how to follow this. Well, you don't call it a movement, but this
community is fine.
What's that?
Communities. We can use that term.
Communities. Okay. Tell us about it.
Really quick, someone asked a question that's important to answer. How can you possibly guarantee safety? Lucky, that's a very fair question. We do not guarantee safety. I want to be clear about that. That's why we don't use the term safe space. We don't use the term that you're guaranteed. Now, and here's why. Here's the reason why. When you enter into our Facebook community, there are 5,000 people there. Now, we have rules, we have mods for sure. But we can't guarantee that someone might not say something that triggers someone else, right? So we do our best. We absolutely moderate, and we're always talking about who do we prioritize. So, for example, we really do our best to prioritize the voices of the marginalized over people who maybe walk in as gatekeepers saying, I think you're wrong, all right? So we prioritize that over the other. But we do not guarantee safety. I think that's impossible to frankly guarantee it. We do our best to hold space for each other. We do our best to make room for each other. We do our best to, live in that tension sometimes, and we try and balance when's appropriate tension, when's not. But that's not a guarantee that I think anyone can offer, let alone us, just to be transparent about that.
That's awesome.
Okay. As far as where they can find us, just our Instagram's fine, the New Evangelicals, or on podcasts, or anywhere that the New Evangelicals is, you can find us. If you want to donate to our work, you can do it right in the link in our bio. We are a nonprofit, so all donations are tax deductible, which is super nice. And our DMs are open. We have an open DM policy. We respond to pretty much every single one. So that's what we do.
Tim, man, you are awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad.
Thank you for taking the time and being so open and sharing and everything. And I just want to encourage everybody that is not following Tim, follow them. Go to the website as well, the New Evangelical. And let me tell you something. Your website is outstanding as well. And don't forget to listen to his podcast. I tell you, it is absolutely amazing what you guys are doing. Totally. And so I feel honored to be able to talk to you. And I can't wait to talk to you some more in the future.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks for having me. It was great talking to you.
All right. Thank you, everybody that came and showed up.
See ya.
Talk there. Bye-bye.